My name is Nadia. I'm 31 years old, and 3 months ago, my twin sister Vera knocked on my apartment door at 2 a.m. with a split lip, a bruise the color of a late autumn storm spreading from her jaw up toward her cheekbone, and a look in her eyes that I will spend the rest of my life trying to forget. Not fear exactly, something worse than fear. The particular bone-deep exhaustion of someone who has been afraid for so long that fear has stopped feeling like a warning and started feeling like the weather, just the permanent condition of existing. She was wearing his hoodie, a grey one with a university logo on the chest that she had never attended. That detail, his hoodie, his school, his brand on her body even in the moment she was fleeing him, did something to me that I still don't have clean language for. She stood in my doorway smelling like his laundry detergent, her arms crossed over her chest the way you cross your arms when you're trying to make yourself smaller, and I understood without her saying a single word that this was not the first time, that this had been the architecture of her life for longer than I had allowed myself to believe, and that the woman standing in front of me had spent years quietly disappearing inside a marriage that I had attended as maid of honor, danced at, cried at, toasted with a glass of champagne, and a speech that made the whole room laugh. What Marcus did next, after she left, after he spent 11 days thinking he had survived it, after he believed the story he had always told himself that she would come back, that she always came back, that he was the fixed point of her universe and not its warden, was the last mistake he made inside the life he thought was permanent. What we did in response was not loud, it was not dramatic. It did not involve a confrontation, a speech, a moment of catharsis that he could point to and call unfair. It was quiet, it was methodical, and when it was over, it was irreversible. Before I go any further, I just want to take a second to say, if you found this channel, if this story was recommended to you or someone shared it with you, please hit subscribe and ring that notification bell. It means more than I can tell you, and drop a comment right now telling me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm genuinely asking. I love seeing where these stories land. Every single comment gets read. And this community is the reason I keep doing this. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. Vera and I entered the world 4 minutes apart on a Tuesday morning in October in a hospital in Akron, Ohio, during a rainstorm that our mother would describe for the rest of our lives as biblical, just absolutely biblical. I thought God himself was announcing something. She was 4 minutes older. She never let me forget it. That was one of the constants of our shared life. Vera's gentle, laughing authority, the way she wore those 4 minutes like a small crown. She was the big sister, the dreamer, the one who read novels in the bathtub and left damp paperbacks on the edge of the sink like evidence of a life fully inhabited. Or we were identical in the way twins are always described as identical and almost never are. The same dark eyes with a slight downward tilt at the outer corners, the same widow's peak, the same way of tilting our heads when we were thinking about something difficult. Our mother said she couldn't tell us apart until she looked at our hands. Vera bit her nails, not anxiously, just absent-mindedly, the way some people doodle. I didn't. That was the whole difference, as far as our mother was concerned. We grew up in a small, split-level house on a street that had once been nice and was in the long, slow process of becoming something else. The kind of neighborhood where the houses are well-meaning but tired, where the gutters are always almost cleaned, where every garage contains at least one broken appliance that somebody intends to fix. Our father worked at a tool and die shop, long shifts, and came home smelling like machine oil and a specific brand of used up that made conversation feel like an additional imposition on a man who had already given everything he had to give that day. He was not unkind. He was simply absent in the way that presence does not guarantee. He was there in the house and somewhere else entirely. Our mother was warm, genuinely warm, the kind of warm that fills a room and makes children feel loved in a generalized, atmospheric way. But she was scattered. She started things. A garden, a novel, a business selling handmade candles, an online course about real estate investing, a commitment to learning Italian. The house showed the evidence of these beginnings everywhere. A grow light in the corner of the living room with nothing under it, in a candle mold in the kitchen cabinet, a workbook on the coffee table with 3 pages filled in and the rest blank. The kitchen had a smell I still cannot fully shake. Not bad exactly, but the faint, persistent sourness of a sponge that had been wet one day too many, the smell of a house where things were almost taken care of. I was 11 years old the first time I understood that I was different from the rest of my family in a specific consequential way. Not smarter. I want to be precise about that. Vera was brilliant in ways I wasn't, intuitive and emotionally perceptive in ways that would take me years to even approximate. But I had a particular relationship with disorder that I now understand to be a kind of gift, and that I then experienced simply as physical discomfort. Chaos made me itchy. Untracked obligations felt like a sound just below hearing. When things were not organized, when plans were not made, when the numbers were not added up and accounted for, I experienced it as a low-level persistent noise in my body that I could not switch off. So I organized things, not because anyone asked me to, because the noise was unbearable. By 12, I was keeping track of the household bills in a spiral notebook I stored in my desk drawer. Blue cover, wide-ruled. I had made tabs with post-it notes: electric, gas, water, car insurance, credit card, and I updated it every time a bill arrived. I left reminder notes on the refrigerator. I tracked the due dates. I made a column for what had been paid and what was still outstanding. Nobody asked me to do this. Nobody knew I was doing it. I did it because I had watched the electricity get shut off twice, and I found the feeling of preventable disaster to be among the worst feelings available to a human being. If I could see it coming, I could stop it. The notebook was my way of seeing. The summer I was 15, my father lost his job. He'd been at the shop 14 years. The shop closed. That was that. He spent 6 weeks applying for other work and 4 months sinking into a quiet depression that expressed itself mostly as long hours of television and a particular way of sitting in his chair that communicated he was not to be approached. My mother, in response, did what she always did with anxiety. She spent. Not recklessly. She wasn't buying fur coats. Small things. A new lamp. A kitchen gadget. A week's worth of dinners from the restaurant 2 streets over instead of cooking. Each individual purchase was defensible. Together over those months, they were not. I remember the specific evening I sat down at the kitchen table with my notebook and laid out where we were. The desktop fan on the counter was going. It was July, no central air. And it made that sound it always made, like a small, determined machine on the verge of a breakdown, a plastic rattling that I associated with summer in that house for years afterward. I added up the columns. I looked at what was coming in, which was not much, and what was going out, which was too much. And I looked at the gap between them. Then I went to find my father. He was in his chair. I showed him the notebook. I explained the numbers. He looked at the page for a long time. Then he looked at me with something in his expression that I couldn't name at 15, but that I would eventually understand as a complicated mixture of pride and relief and guilt. The look of someone who has just realized that someone else has been carrying something they should have been carrying themselves. "You're smart, Nadia," he said. "You'll figure it out." He meant it as a compliment. He meant it as the highest thing he knew how to say. I understand that now, and it doesn't make me angry the way it used to. But what I heard at 15, sitting across from my father in the living room with the fan rattling and the notebook open in my hands, was not a compliment. What I heard was a transfer of ownership. You will figure it out. Not we will, not I will, you. My father handed me the problem and then leaned back in his chair and watched television, and I went back to the kitchen table and figured it out. I called the electric company. I called the gas company. I found out which bills had hardship programs and called those numbers. I renegotiated the payment schedule on 2 accounts using language I had looked up on the library computer. I was 15. The woman at the electric company had asked to speak to my mother, and I had said my mother was unavailable, which was technically true, and she had spoken to me instead, and I had handled it. I filed that experience in the notebook along with everything else. I kept figuring things out. By the time Vera and I were applying to colleges, I had a part-time job, a savings account, and a plan that extended 4 years into the future in enough detail that I could describe it in bullet points. Vera had a boyfriend named Devon, a collection of novels with broken spines, and a serene faith that things would work out. They did, for both of us, in different ways. I got a partial scholarship to a state university and studied accounting because I wanted to understand the language that the world actually runs on, which is not love or ambition but money, and the movement of money, and the stories that money tells when you know how to read it. Vera went to a different school and studied art history, transferred once after the program didn't suit her, then again to follow a different opportunity, and eventually found her footing in event planning. She was extraordinary at it. Genuinely. She had my organizational instincts and her own irreplaceable eye for beauty, which is a combination that turns out to be quite rare and quite valuable. She built a client list through word of mouth, through the sheer accumulated weight of doing things well and being genuinely kind to people. She was good at her life in those years between college and Marcus. I want to make sure I say that clearly. She was capable and competent and building something real. What came next was not a consequence of weakness. We talked every few days. We sent each other voice memos while commuting. We had a shared language made of references that would have been unintelligible to anyone else, built up over 25 years of being the same person in two bodies. I knew which side she slept on. I knew that she cried at commercials but not at movies. I knew that she hated the texture of cantaloupe with a revulsion she found difficult to justify intellectually. I knew her the way you know something you have always known without remembering learning it. And then she met Marcus at a professional event she was managing in the spring of her 27th year. She called me afterward, walking to her car, her voice doing the thing it did when she was trying to contain excitement. He was the only one at the whole event who came up and asked how the event planner was doing, she said. Like as a person, not just whether the canapes were right. I remember thinking, that's a good sign. I remember thinking that. I want to try to describe what the next 3 years looked like from the outside, from where I was standing, because I think it matters. Not to excuse myself, but to explain how this kind of thing works, how it is designed to work, how the architecture of control is specifically built to be invisible to the people who love the person inside it. From the outside, Vera was busy. She and Marcus were a unit, a couple in capital letters, always doing something together, always in motion. He was present at every family event she attended, attentive and articulate, the kind of man who helps clear the table and remembers your name the second time he meets you and says the right thing in every awkward silence. He was easy to like. I liked him. That is the part that sits heaviest. The calls between Vera and me became shorter, less frequent. At first, I didn't register this as a pattern. She was in a new relationship, in the first years of building a life with someone. And of course that changes the texture of other relationships. I was happy for her. I didn't want to be the sister who clung, who measured the silence between calls with suspicion. Over the following 2 years, I sent Vera 187 messages. Not all of them required a response. Some were memes, some were voice memos, some were photographs of things I'd seen that reminded me of her. But I counted, because I count things, and the number that required at least acknowledgement was closer to 90. She replied to 43. I told myself she was happy. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself the particular anxiety I felt was my old friend. The noise in my body that sounds like something is wrong when nothing is wrong, that had been misfiring since I was 15 years old. I told myself this right up until the night she appeared at my door. She came in without saying much. I made tea. The specific kind she liked, the one I kept in my cabinet for when she visited, even though I don't drink it myself, because I had always kept it there, because that was the kind of sister I was. She sat at my kitchen table with her hands around the mug, and for a long time she just breathed. I sat across from her, and I let her breathe. I had learned, over many years of loving people in crisis, that the worst thing you can do is fill the silence. Sometimes people need you to simply remain present while they locate the door inside themselves, the one that opens onto language. When she started talking, she talked for a long time. She talked about the first year, which had been good. Genuinely good, she said. In a way that was important to her to establish. She wasn't naive. She wasn't a fool. It was good. He was attentive and present and funny, and the thing she described as his intensity, which she had read as passion, had felt like being chosen. Then she described the way chosen slowly became controlled, how the intensity that felt like passion revealed itself, over months, to be something else, a surveillance dressed as devotion. He wanted to know where she was because he loved her so much. He didn't like her going out with certain friends because he worried about her. He'd had a bad experience, could she understand? He would feel so much better if she checked in when she arrived somewhere, just so he knew she was safe. She had accommodated each of these requests individually. They were each defensible. They each made a kind of sense. But they accumulated, and the accumulation had a direction, and the direction was inward, toward him, toward the house, toward an ever smaller orbit, with him at the center. The financial control began within the first year of their marriage. She had a good salary, She had built her client list over years. He suggested when they married that they combine finances entirely. One joint account, everything together. Wasn't that what marriage meant? She had agreed because it seemed romantic rather than strategic. What she didn't know was that her salary was deposited into an account to which she had nominal access and actual access only through him. He reviewed every purchase. There was a monthly amount she could spend without discussion. He called it her personal budget. She called it "in my kitchen at 2 a.m. by a different word. The physical violence began after a pregnancy loss in the second year, a miscarriage at 11 weeks that she had not told me about, that she had navigated largely alone because Marcus had managed her communications tightly enough by then that she had felt unable to call me without him knowing. She had been isolated enough by that point that reaching out felt like a risk she wasn't sure how to take. I have sat with that sentence many times since. She had felt unable to call me. Her twin sister, the person who had kept tea in her cabinet for years on the chance she might visit. I don't say this to make it about me. I say it to illustrate how complete the isolation was. If she couldn't reach me, there was no one. When she finished talking, it was nearly 5 a.m. The light outside was starting to change, that early morning blue that doesn't commit to day yet, that sits between things. She was exhausted. I made up the couch and she lay down and was asleep in minutes, the way people sleep when they have finally put something down that they have been carrying alone for a very long time. I sat at my kitchen table. I opened my laptop. I started a document. I typed the date at the top. I began writing down everything she had told me. Not because I wanted to document her pain, but because documentation is how I make things real, how I move them from the territory of feeling into the territory of action. I wrote for 2 hours. When I was done, I had 12 single-spaced pages. Then I closed the laptop, made coffee, and began thinking about what I was going to do about Marcus. What I haven't told you yet, what almost nobody in my life knew at that point, was what I had been building over the previous 4 years while everyone else's eyes were elsewhere. I had started my consultancy the autumn I turned 27. At first, it was a side project, evenings and weekends while I kept my position at a mid-size accounting firm where I did competent, unremarkable work for clients who were pleasant and uninteresting. The side project had a different texture entirely. I specialized in forensic accounting, specifically in financial investigations for family law attorneys. Divorces, mostly. The kind of divorces where one party has money and doesn't want the other party to know how much, where assets vanish into shell companies and offshore instruments, and real estate held in the names of cousins. I was very good at finding the money. I was good at it the way I had always been good at the things I was trained for, methodically, patiently, without ego, following the thread wherever it went. My first year, I had 3 clients. My second year, 9. By the third year, word had moved through the family law community in the particular way that word moves in professional networks when someone is genuinely good at something niche. Quietly, steadily, through personal recommendations from attorneys who had watched me find the thing they had told their clients was impossible to find. By the time Vera appeared at my door, I had 22 active clients and 4 on a waiting list. I had been steadily reinvesting the income. I had a business account, a legal entity, professional liability insurance, a website that was clean and spare and deliberately did not list my rates because my rates had become, by that point, a thing one negotiated. I had been doing this while attending family events, making polite conversation with Marcus at the 2 dinners I had shared with him,